So, hi Ganzeer. I'm Alea. I'm representing Y-Klick. We're an initiative started by Respect Jamaica and UNICEF Jamaica in order to get young people involved in advocacy. So we thought of who we'd like to hear from about, youth advocacy around the world, of people who use social media for great social movements, and we thought you might have a lot of insight into that kind of issue. So it'd be great if you would introduce yourself and say what it is that you're all about.
I go by the name of Ganzeer, and I'm a visual artist. I play around with different media.
So, can you tell me what exactly happened during what has come to be known as the Arab Spring, specifically in Egypt? What were the events that took place, and what did you see happen on the ground?
Well, it all started really on January 25th, 2011, and it was kind of amazing because there was, the word was out that it would be a big protest day. Basically, it was out basically, by word of mouth, by the internet, through Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and everyone knew it was just going to be like sort of like a big protest day.
And a protest about what exactly?
Sorry?
A protest about what exactly?
Well, January 25th is in general Police Day. So it's actually a national holiday where everybody has a day off, and it's supposed to be sort of like commemoration of all the stuff, the activities of the police, and people in Egypt aren't so happy about the activities of the police because it involves a lot of violence and brutality, where it shouldn't be used, even if you were actually a criminal. And in most cases, people really aren't who face this kind of brutality. So it was kind of planned as an anti-police protest, really, initially, and to some extent, there was sort of like a kind of a wishful thinking that it would turn into it would also be a revolution in the wake of all the stuff that happened in Tunisia. But at the same time, it came with a sort of pessimism of like, oh, of course, we're not going to have a revolution here. It doesn't happen, sort of thing. So I was one of the naysayers, to be honest. I was no, it's not going to happen. I've been to protests before, and I know exactly what happens at the protests.
Right.
It's going to happen this time. Everyone's going to get their asses kicked, and we're all going to end up in jail for a couple of nights or something, and beat up or so on. And it's just going to be a handful of people and that sort of thing. So I was one of the naysayers. So I actually was not planning on participating at all in the protest. So I was just hanging out actually at a friend's place that day, who lived in downtown Cairo, and I was just we were listening to music. I was looking up some stuff on the internet, checking out Twitter, and then I started to see these posts from people in my feed, like friends of mine, and it was they were doing using Bamboozer or something. What was it called? I think that's what it's called, like this live video app, where basically they were shooting videos with their cell phones and broadcasting it live onto a link, or various links from different phones, right, onto the internet. So I started looking at these links, and I was seeing that they were in this huge march, something the size I'd never seen before.
Wow.
Ever in an Egyptian protest. And it was massive, and people were chanting, asking for the downfall of Mubarak, basically.
Right. So do you think that it was Tunisia that really made it so different, where they saw, oh, but this kind of change can happen, so maybe we can push for more than we thought we could? Do you think that's what happened?
To some extent, I mean, the Tunisian factor cannot be overlooked, right? On the other hand, I honestly feel like up until it actually happened, no one expected.
Right. So it just kind of something like it was a boiling point, and everybody was just like, okay, this is it, and it just kind of came together.
Yeah, I mean, and it was very organic. It wasn't the planning factor kind of wasn't there. The leading up to Tahrir Square, where it ended up being like a big sit-in, big camp for several days, like wasn't planned. Actually, Tahrir Square wasn't in. It was sort of just by accident, because it was on the way. The protest was like on another side of town, and to get to, I guess at some point, it was somehow decided in the middle of this march that they would go to the Ministry of Interiors, because they're protesting really, the police originally, right? But to get to the Ministry of Interiors, you have to pass through Tahrir Square, and then in Tahrir Square, that's where basically the police kind of contained the protest in the square, and people were attacked heavily by tear gas and stuff. So the protest was dispersed on January 25th. It was still the biggest we'd ever seen, but because of all the violence that happened in the square and that sort of thing, it kind of became. It wasn't before 2 days later when people would decide, okay, we're going to go to the square and camp in the square now, as a sort of, because of everything that happened in the square 2 days before.
Right.
So it was all very kind of organic in a way.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a lot of different social media sites involvement. I guess with the way that life is nowadays, it would be impossible to actually do a protest or any kind of social movement or anything actually in life without social media involvement. But it's interesting to hear how you say that they use this live streaming app, and then they use Facebook to announce a protest date and all of these things. Do you think that social media had a big part in helping things happen the way they did, or do you think it would have happened anyway?
No, I definitely think it would have happened anyway. At every point in history when there is a moment of revolt, right? Part of revolting is kind of spreading the word and getting the word out. And at any point in history, people use whatever tools they have. A few decades before, we would have used like telephones or fax machines. Rewind some more. I know we would have used like the post or telegram or something. Maybe before that, we would have used pigeons.
Morse code.
The point is like to communicate that this thing is happening, and the mode of communication that we use anyway, whether there's a protest or not, right, is social media as a mode of communication. So it makes sense that it would also be used.
Yeah. So it's really that people were at the core, and they had a core issue. They kind of gathered around it, and then things happened, kind of thing. That's
right.
Yeah. Okay.
And I mean, everybody has a phone in their pocket. There's this big thing happening. It kind of even if you're not like a social media savvy person who's like so active or whatever, it just comes as a natural instinct. Like you see this amazing thing, you just like pull your phone out, right?
That's
You'll
true.
do that at concerts, for crying out loud. So if you see like 200 conscript policemen beating up 200 protesters, you're going to pull out your phone and you're going to film it, and then you're going to put it on the internet. It just like comes naturally,
Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about social media, we tend to think of a younger audience. Is it that the protests were mostly made up of like younger people?
Yes, I would say that's true. I wouldn't say that there wasn't a variety of age groups present. I mean that the variety of age groups, variety of social classes, variety of all kind of walks of life. Definitely, everyone is present, but it also goes without saying that the vast majority, in terms of age group, would have to be younger, simply because of I suppose the rebelliousness of the act.
Right.
I guess it's the percentage of 50-year-olds who are gonna decide to be rebellious, I guess, are always going to be less than
Yeah.
the percentage of 20-year-olds who feel like we're gonna do this rebellious thing now.
That's a very clear observation. What do you think now that things have sort of played out? It's been a few years. Certain things were resolved, but then, we've seen that the situation hasn't exactly gotten the results that maybe people hoped for. Can you kind of describe what has happened since the protest, and also give your ideas on what you think, how you feel about what has happened since, basically?
Well, basically, I mean, nothing has been resolved, actually. I think to a large extent the Egyptian people were tricked into thinking that things were on the path of resolution, mainly because we trusted the vast majority of us anyway, not really everyone, but the vast majority kind of trusted the Egyptian military to oversee the so-called transition from dictatorship to democracy,
right.
Which was foolish of us because the dictatorship was in fact installed by them,
right.
But the act of the sort of quote unquote arrest of Mubarak, right, and kind of the fact that Mubarak himself was not the guy who appeared on television to say that he's stepping down, and somebody else, his vice president, stepped in to say it instead of him, made it seem to everyone that Mubarak was actually stepped down, not out of his own will, but that he was sort of forced, and that their arrest was genuine. So people saw that the transition would probably be genuine, the arrest of Mubarak was genuine, his trial would be genuine. So a sort of belief in the justice system as well,
right?
Which also turned out to be a big mistake.
Right.
If you compare this scenario, how things turned out, you compare Egypt to Tunisia, the difference is Tunisia, they actually made their president flee the entire country as opposed to go through the justice process, right, in the country.
So
that,
I guess
would have been corrupt, right?
I guess a lot of the times then, because I mean, what I've been noticing, because I've been trying to study these different social justice movements that we see taking place over the past few years, just to understand how people are taking control in this time and see what methods are working, because we have unprecedented documentation. So what tends to happen is that you see that these different tactics kind of play off of each other. So people who are doing Black Lives Matter now, I don't know if you follow that very much, but in Black Lives Matter, they know that there's a lot of stakeholders that they're fighting against, which is usually the case whenever when you're involved in activism. There's somebody who's doing something and they have a stake in continuing that action, and then you want to make them stop. So what Black Lives Matter has done is that they have avoided putting too many people who are recognizable to the front. It's not an individual movement, it's a collective movement. There are no leaders like during the civil rights movement where you could say Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and these were the people who were leading. So when you talk about that, the fact that everybody was kind of trusting a kind of system, and it was a group of people trusting the rule of law to work out, do you think that, kind of almost anarchic collectivism, when you have these protest movements that don't necessarily have anyone leading, there's just like a general idea of what you want to change, and everybody's trying to work together. Do you think that's the way, or do you think it's better when you have representatives who take over from the previous stakeholders and they are on your side and they take those positions of power? So basically what I'm asking in a really long way is, do you think that it's better to try to improve the system of power, or try to just dismantle it altogether and replace it with what you think you can control? I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't think improving upon an already existing system, in my view, I personally don't think it's the way to go. I think the result is usually a kind of hindrance in advancement, because you end up holding on to a lot of things because of the rules, and then you make the changes are made in like small increments, right? Mm-hmm. To some extent, I guess it is the safe way to go, right? It's the method that is least risky somehow, right? You're not dismantling an entire way of life, an entire system, right? And you're going about your life, you're going about your day, but hoping that like there will be like little improvements, very very small increments of improvements day by day. But I feel like the end result is like, you know what, you look back 100 years later, you look back and like, have things really changed? I mean, that's kind of why Black Lives Matter exists.
Yeah,
to be honest,
exactly. Right? Like when you said that, I thought like, wow, that's it.
Had actually accomplished everything it wanted to accomplish, right? Mm-hmm. Then there would be no need for Black Lives Matter, right?
That's the fact so
that it
true.
Does exist is in itself evidence of the downside of kind of small improvements.
And the way that oppression.
And all the time, by the way, whenever these small improvements are made, the system in place tries to paint them as huge improvements.
Yeah.
And tries to show you like, well, see, it was so different like 5 years ago because we didn't have this particular little thing, and so you don't need to protest anymore. Everyone could like go about their day and go to work with the satisfaction that we now live in an incredibly democratic society. But then a few decades pass, and then people realize, oh wait, this actually isn't like a full-on democracy yet. You've been tricked, and then you have to protest for a lot of the things that people were calling for, I don't know, however many decades ago.
True. Okay, so very quickly, the final note, because like there's a bit of a minute left, but we can cut off and start again if needs be. But really quickly, like what did you come out of the whole movement feeling most inspired by, most optimistic about? What do you feel gives you that glimmer of hope to know that, yeah, this can happen eventually?
For me, I mean, it was just like the most amazing time. I'd seen things and was part of things that I never had seen before. And it was for the first time ever that I saw like huge numbers of people in the thousands who literally did not care about their own selves at all. And it wasn't about, there was no selfishness whatsoever. The ego was taken out of the equation. It was purely about the greater good for all society and for everybody, and every, also for people in the future who aren't even born yet. It was just